Welcome back, everyone. I'm Laura Nownes, and I hope you're having just as much fun with making these blocks as I am and getting them ready for you. Today we have a very classic block that we're covering. It's called the log cabin. This block has really stood the test of time. It has, I've got a couple of samples here to show you. What is really important about this block that provides so many design opportunities is the fact that it creates a diagonal line right through the center so that you can play with either color or value, meaning lights on one side, darks on the other. All of the blocks are made exactly the same, and then depending on how you sew them together, there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of design possibilities. It's a perfect scrap quilt. And once you start building a stash, which means just lots of extra pieces of fabric, you can make your own little scrappy log cabin quilt. So let's get started. I've decided today that I would start with, I'm going to have green fabrics on one side and yellow fabrics on the other. So I cut my center squares 2.5 inches wide. And because you're making 4 blocks, you need 4 2.5-inch squares. And then the strips I cut 1.5 inches. Now remember to refer to the PDF because that will tell you exactly how many strips you'll need to make the 4 blocks. Before I start sewing these, I like to just have a preview. And by that I mean I'm going to take my strips and arrange them in a similar order that will be sewn onto the block. So everything gets sewn right onto the center. So I'm starting with my yellow because I'm going to have the yellow fabrics on one side of the block and I'm going to have the green fabrics on the opposite side. So watch what I'm doing here. I'm just starting with yellow. So yellow, green, and then yellow again, and finally green. So I'll take a look at it. At this point I say, do I really like it this way? Maybe I want to reverse the placement of these 2 greens, reverse the placement of these 2 yellows, which I think maybe I'll do because I can see in the sample that I've made up here, this one was on the inside. So it's an easy fix, and this is the time to do it. I think it really saves a lot of disappointment if you'll just take this extra step and do a little planning at this point in time. Okay, so now that you have it laid out, I want you to pick the strips up in the order in which you're going to sew them onto the center square. So if you will start with the closest one to the center, I'm going to start with my yellow. And I'm going to put this onto the board right side. I'm going to put it right side down. And I'm going to work around the block in a counterclockwise direction. I find it really helpful to organize these strips because so often I get distracted, something happens, I'm pulled away from the sewing room, and when I come back, they're neatly stacked, ready to sew. So did you see I went around and then around again, and then I'm going to flip them. So my very first strip is on the top. This is the one that I'm going to be starting with, okay? So let's scoot this over just a little bit so I can show you what happens. I've taken my center squares and stitched them onto the very first strip that was on the top of the stack. So when I had them laid out, they were side by side like this. Let me just open them so you can kind of see where we went here. Okay, so these have already been stitched. So I placed them side by side. The 4 center squares next to the first strip that's on the top. Right sides together, you're going to fold them and place them. Okay? Keep the edges even and then stitch all the way down. All the way down. Notice too that there's a little space in between the squares. This gives you an opportunity to now bring this over to the pressing board. Press flat, press flat. Now in this case, I find that the block works best, as far as the pressing goes, if I will be consistent in pressing all of my strips away from the center. regardless of light and dark. It just gives me a much neater finish. So I'm going to turn and press all the way down. Okay? But remember, always on the wrong side first, and then on the right side. So, back to the cutting. Let's move this up just a bit. And then use your tools, your cutting ruler, to trim these units apart. Take advantage of all the lines on the board, on the ruler that you can. In fact, I rely heavily on the lines on my ruler rather than the lines on the board. See, I'm not as concerned here with the placement of my units on the board, but I'm more concerned with what's happening with the ruler here. So I've got one of the lines here directly over the seam, like this, and then I'm going to carefully turn and trim. Okay. Now here's a good checkpoint for you. Every time you add a strip, you're adding an inch. The center square was cut at 2.5. You've just added a strip. So the measurement now should be 3.5. It's still 2.5 in this direction because we've not changed anything. So all of these units need to measure 2.5 by 3.5. If they don't, if there's something a little bit sticking out on the edge here, you go ahead and trim it off. But always be careful to align one of the lines on your ruler right over the seam. Okay? So you go ahead and cut all 4 of those apart. And then the next step is to take the same fabric. So again, let's do it there. Let's do it right here. I'm going to use that same fabric, and I'm going to place it like this. So you can have all 4 of these, even though they're not trimmed. I want you to see what happens here. Okay? You place them side by side, just like this. All of them with the right side facing up. And then you turn and place them directly over the strip. And then you're going to stitch all the way down. Okay? What helps me remember this direction, because I think if anything goes wrong here, it's usually this. The students flip it this way, or they flip it this way, or they flip it out. The last strip that you've sewn on, which in this case is the first one, is always right at the top. It's horizontal, right across the top. Okay? And I've got one here showing you. Okay? So you can see the back side. So here's the strip sewn on to another one of these, all the way down. Again, leave a little bit of fabric right in between, and that gives you an opportunity to bring this over to the pressing board. Press it flat, 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 all the way down, and turn and press right over the stitching line. I only have 3 of them on here, but you know that you'll be working with 4 on yours. Okay, let's cut these apart. All right, remember I said every time you add a strip, you add an inch. So the last unit we had was 2.5 by 3.5, and now we've got one that's square. So it is going to measure 3.5 by 3.5. So square it up. Use your ruler and make sure that you've got all of these lines. I usually have to give a little bit of a haircut every here and there. You see this right here? It's not much, but honestly, it just makes my life so much easier if I will catch it now than wait until the very end and hope that my block measures 6.5. If you'll check it each step of the way, then when you get to the end, they're all exactly the same. Okay? So here's my next piece. You will have 4 of these, and I'm done with this strip. Let's move this out of the way. And I'm going to take the next strip that's on the top of my pile, and I'm going to place it like this. Remember the direction. So, right side's facing up. The last strip you've sewn on, right across the top, and stitch. Turn and you're going to stitch, and you'll have 3 more going down. Okay, I've got one started over here so I can show you. It's been stitched, okay, right along here. Let's bring it over and press it. It's very predictable. It's very organized. It's very methodical. Once you get in the rhythm of the placement, which is really key, then it's just, it's a pattern. You just continue in the same order, adding one strip after another. Okay. Now, in my case, I have used the same fabric in 2 positions. Okay. But you could certainly make this just as scrappy as you want, and every strip could be different. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so here's my new unit, 3.5 by 4.5 at this point. So what comes next? I've used this yellow twice. I've only used the green once, so the green is going to be used again. Okay, so here's one that I've started. It's on here. Here's your placement. Here's the green, here's the unit, and turn. Leave a little space in between, and you're going to stitch along the right hand side. When you're stitching along, be careful that these little seams don't flip back on you. So you'll want to put a few pins in here just to hold it nice and secure. Okay. Bring it back over, press it, turn, and press, and trim. So let's see what measurement we're at now. It's square. So we should be at 4.5 by 4.5. Again, check yourself. Trim it off, square it up, clean it up, make it work. Okay. So there we go. So I've used yellow twice, green twice. I'm ready to move on to the next strip that's at the top of the stack, and it goes this way. So we have right side facing up with the strip, the last strip, which is really the longest strip, and it's the only strip at this point that does not have a seam in it. Let me turn it over. Let's see if we can get this on camera. See, if you go along the edge, this is the only strip that does not have a seam in it. Every other one has a seam. So this is the one that is at the top, just like that. Turn and stitch, and you'll have 3 more following, just like that. Okay, so I've got one here. Here it is. I could put another one on. Longest one on the top. Turn and stitch. Okay, so I think by now you probably know the drill. We're pressing on the wrong side. Turn and press on the right side, nice and sharp. Trim these apart, square it up. So now we're at 4.5 by 5.5. All right. And what's the next one? We're going to use another piece of this one right here. Alrighty. So it goes like this. Right side facing up, longest piece on the top, turn and stitch. Okay? Turn and stitch. And I've got one right here, ready to go. Let's go ahead and do this. And we're almost there. I've only got one more fabric on my stack. So that means I can trim this off and then add my final strip to complete the block. And when I'm done, it's going to measure 6.5. It's going to be just exactly what we need. So let's trim this. Trim it to size. Take your last strip, which is this green one here. Where's the longest one? Right here at the top. So you're going to turn and you're going to stitch. Add 3 more. And then you've got your strip on this side. And let me bring the last one over. Here's your final one with the last strip on. And at this point, we've got a 6.5 inch block, It's all pressed. All of the seams are pressed out away from the center. And there you go. It's a great block. I think of all the blocks, this one and the Sawtooth Star are two of my favorite. But as far as Scrappy Quilt goes, it's hard to beat this. So enjoy the week, have fun sewing, and I hope to see you back here in the classroom.